Good evening and welcome. I'm Bernice, and I'll be serving you today. What can I get for you? A drink? Some snacks? Oh, a little flames! Mocktails, mixers, ice. The snacks are real nice. Sodas, I'll mix dry. I'm lit, you can't deny. Wherever you want, wherever you need. So good you never, ever want to leave. Anything that you desire, set it on.
Our story begins with the birth of a child. A woman lies beside him, relieved that they have finally met. She calls out to her husband, but he is on the phone, pacing and visibly distraught. He mentions that the company he works for, or owns, has gone bankrupt. Time passes and the scene shifts to the boy as a young child. He is eating, his expression grim, as he laments being born into extreme poverty. "This is just the start of my bad luck," he mutters. In one instance, he picks at some grass and begins calculating aloud that a single meal costs at least 200 yen. Even as a child, his life seems defined by his misfortune. The boy grows older and his streak of bad luck continues. While eating outside, someone accidentally spills a drink on him. When shopping, an item somehow ends up in his bag, making it look like he is a shoplifter. These moments add to his unshakable belief that his life is cursed. At the age of 18, the boy decides to put an end to his misfortune. The scene shifts dramatically as he is seen fighting a massive tiger, an enormous beast standing at least 5 meters tall. The tiger is poised to attack, its eyes glowing with a magical aura. It unleashes its power, tearing into the boy's arm. He grunts in pain, only for his arm to regenerate instantly. As his arm reforms, the boy punches the tiger lightly. He reflects on his situation, thinking, "There's no way I can kill this thing with a single punch. It's going to tear me apart." But to his astonishment, the light punch obliterates the tiger entirely, destroying the area around it in the process. The scene shifts again. The boy is interrupted by a voice asking if he has been paying attention. He finds himself seated across from a child dressed in punk-style gothic attire. The child is smoking, her expression both exasperated and amused. She complains that young people these days don't seem to care, adding that thanks to him, she has failed yet again to quit smoking. The boy, unimpressed, comments, "You're calling me young? You don't look much older yourself." The girl smirks, leaning back in her chair, her feet on the table. "Oh, I'm much older than you think," she replies. "I'm a god." She introduces herself, explaining that she possesses divine power and that she will reincarnate him, a poor soul who died young, into another world. "You'll even get 3 unique abilities," she adds, though the outcomes will be random. She goes on to explain that, unfortunately for him, all 3 of his abilities are essentially duds. "Ridiculous, right?" she chuckles. "So what's your name?" The boy introduces himself. "Mutou Kushina." The god waves dismissively. Right. Your name's hard to remember. Anyway, no matter how you look at it, your luck is terrible." Mutou smirks, surprising her. "Heh? Bad luck," he mutters. The god raises an eyebrow. "What's with that creepy smirk?" Ignoring her comment, Mutou listens as she begins to explain his 3 abilities. "First, you have super speedy regeneration," she says. "It lets you heal instantly. Sounds amazing, right? But there's a catch. You can only use it a limited number of times. Exceed that limit and you die." Mutou nods, muttering, "I see." "Second," she continues, "Agelessness. You won't age. Simple enough." Mutou thinks to himself that these abilities don't sound so bad, but the god interrupts his thoughts. "Don't get too excited. You'll figure out why they're all terrible soon enough." "Finally, your third ability, Grit, or Indomitable Spirit," she says. "This one's the real kicker." Mutou tilts his head. "What's that supposed to mean?" The god explains, using a game analogy. "Every living being has a health gauge. Injuries, illnesses, and all that lower your gauge. When it hits 0, you die. But with Grit, you'll be revived, just barely, with 1 point of health." Mutou's eyes widen. "Wait, does that mean I can't die?" The god confirms. "Yes, but only when you're on the brink of death." Mutou thinks it over and comments that the abilities still seem pretty impressive. The god laughs, taking a puff from her cigar. "Oh, they're useless," she says. Confused, Mutou asks why. The god explains, "To activate these skills, you can't fear death. And here's the thing. Every living being has an instinct to survive. Death is terrifying, even for someone like you. No one escapes that fear." She leans closer, her tone mocking. "So, what do you think now? Still feeling confident?" Mutou's surroundings suddenly darken, and before he can respond, he is transported to another world. Grass fields and towering trees stretch out before him. The god's voice echoes in his mind. "Good luck surviving, kid. You're going to need it." Mutou looks around, taking in his new surroundings. He mutters to himself, "I won't survive in this world, and my skills are all useless." Mutou looked around and muttered to himself that he was really in another world. All he could see was a forest, and he felt relieved that he wouldn't starve since there were plenty of weeds around. Fortunately, Mutou also found a water source. Despite what the god had said, maybe he'd survive in this new world after all. Suddenly, Mutou remembered something. He saw a woman asking for forgiveness, saying she couldn't do anything for him. Shaking it off, he splashed water on his face, smiled, and told himself that he couldn't think like that. Gotta smile, he thought. If he didn't smile, things would only get worse. As Mutou looked around, he saw a vine that might come in handy and a mushroom. Being in this new world, he figured it could work for him. But unbeknownst to him, a hidden danger was approaching. An ape suddenly appeared above him, and Mutou, relieved that the god hadn't sent him to a town full of people, being around others made him nervous, continued thinking to himself. Busy in his thoughts, the ape slammed the ground, sending Mutou flying a few centimeters. Surprised, Mutou tried to stand up, only to see that his arm had been severed. Screaming in pain, he looked at his severed arm on the ground. But his regeneration ability kicked in, and his arm slowly reformed to its original state. However, just as Mutou regained his footing, the ape slammed him down again, crushing his regenerated arm. The ape grabbed him and lifted him to its face, biting into his torso. As he was being eaten, Mutou suddenly recalled what the god had said. He wouldn't survive in this world. While Mutou struggled, the god watched him from her place, smoking and feeling disappointed. Her skills hadn't worked after all, and Mutou couldn't overcome the world's trial to help with her plans. Now that Mutou was stuck in the ape's stomach, even his super regeneration couldn't save him. As for grit, Indomitable Spirit, it was an absolutely useless skill. The god muttered that Mutou was truly unlucky, and she'd have to find another reincarnation. But then, to her surprise, she heard a sound coming from the screen. She saw Mutou's arm coming out of the ape's stomach, and she shouted, "What the heck is going on?" The ape started choking as Mutou clawed his way out of its stomach. The god was stunned. She couldn't believe that Mutou had survived and was actually clawing his way out. She initially thought his super regeneration had saved him, but it wasn't that. It was the grit, Indomitable Spirit, that had revived him at the brink of death. The god couldn't believe it. Mutou, still inside the ape's stomach, began shouting, "Why did I survive?" He screamed at the top of his lungs. He continued, venting his frustration about being reincarnated by some weird god and being stuck with unnecessary healing skills. He thought he'd finally die for real. The god, watching all this unfold, was speechless. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Mutou complained about how long he'd have to keep living, constantly drawing the short straw. The god, still in shock, was now sweating, trying to understand how Mutou had activated grit, Indomitable Spirit. It was supposed to be impossible to activate it. She started to worry about what kind of twisted guy Mutou really was. Meanwhile, Mutou continued to complain about his life, asking why he had to keep drawing the short end of the stick. Meanwhile, God is still in disbelief that Mutou managed to activate the skill and begins to question who he really is. She glances at her table and realizes she had only skimmed through his file instead of reading it thoroughly. As she takes a closer look at Mutou's life, she is stunned by what she discovers. A scene unfolds of a young Mutou being hit by a car, with paramedics working urgently to keep him conscious. In the background, his parents can be seen talking to the police, their faces filled with apparent worry. Thankfully, Mutou survives the accident and is now recovering in the hospital. A nurse checks in, asking if the painkillers are helping. Mutou quietly replies, "No." The nurse sighs and explains that, since he's still a minor, they can't give him stronger medication, so he'll need to endure the pain for now. Shortly after, Mutou's parents arrive, wearing their signature unsettling smiles. They ask how he's doing in their usual overly cheerful tone, which only adds to the tension. His mother then leans in and asks him how it really feels. Mutou feigns ignorance, pretending not to understand. Frustrated, she moves closer and pulls down his hospital gown, exposing scars across his body. With an accusatory tone, she asks if these scars were truly from the car accident. Mutou, with no energy to argue, mutters a simple, lifeless, yeah. His parents' smiles grow wider, and they begin gushing about how worried they've been. His father shifts the conversation to compensation, gleefully explaining how the accident will lead to a generous payout from the driver involved. He smugly points out that because it was a child who got hurt, the settlement will be substantial, enough to ease their financial troubles for a while. With a satisfied grin, he comments on how their efforts are finally paying off. Here, Mutou reveals the dark truth. None of the accidents in his life were random. His parents had orchestrated everything, from faking falls in restaurants to stuffing items into Mutou's bag to make him look like a shoplifter. It was all calculated. If Mutou got caught, they would dismiss it as an innocent child's mistake. Mutou remembers how it all started when he was just 5 years old. At first, his parents lashed out in frustration over their financial struggles, but what began as occasional scolding escalated into routine punishments. His father would blame him for ruining their lives, shouting at him with anger and disdain. Over time, Mutou realized none of it was his fault, but by then he had already stopped caring. One vivid memory stands out. His mother, exhausted after a long day at work, lashed out at him for not preparing dinner. She struck him on the back with a wire hanger. Another time, his father hit him simply because Mutou didn't laugh at one of his jokes. That was the moment Mutou began practicing his trademark unsettling smile, hoping it might somehow appease his father and reduce the punishments. But the mistreatment only grew worse. His father once shattered a beer bottle over his head. His mother struck him with a hot frying pan. His father, in a drunken rage, threw him against a wall. Even when Mutou was sick, his mother would berate him, pouring water over his face as if to wake him forcibly. On one occasion, she even threatened him with a knife. Day after day, Mutou endured this relentless cycle of cruelty, each moment blending into the next, leaving no room for hope or relief. To Mutou, pain is inevitable. Over time, he mastered the art of completely blocking it out. Watching Mutou's life unfold, the god is stunned but begins to notice a pattern. The skill, grit, Indomitable Spirit allows someone to return from the brink of death with just 1 HP. However, to activate it, one must truly have no fear of death, an almost impossible condition to meet. The concept of no fear of death isn't as simple as it sounds. It doesn't just mean not being afraid of dying. Pain, after all, is the body's mechanism for survival. The brain detects problems in the body through pain, and when someone feels pain, instinctive negative emotions like fear surface. This fear, even in the smallest amount, is a survival instinct that keeps living beings alive. Without the fear of pain, a person wouldn't avoid danger or notice if an illness was harming them, which could ultimately lead to death. In short, fearing pain is deeply tied to the fear of death. For someone to have no fear of death, they would need complete mastery over pain. The god finally realizes why Mutou is able to activate grit, Indomitable Spirit, but she's still in disbelief. Merely enduring pain isn't enough. Even someone who wants to die would instinctively fear pain. She looks back at Mutou's files and reflects on his life. She concludes that his harsh environment forced him to overcome pain completely, and by doing so, he also overcame the fear of death itself. Meanwhile, Mutou stands over the fallen ape, lamenting that it failed to kill him. He mutters about how his bad luck continues. Then he starts laughing to himself, reminiscing about how his entire life has felt like wandering endlessly through a desert with no end in sight. Each day he's grown more tired of living. As he thinks about it, he realizes the only escape from his endless suffering is death. Mutou recalls what God told him about his skills: Speedy Regeneration, Agelessness, and grit, Indomitable Spirit, all of which make him incapable of dying. Yet, despite everything, he remains strangely optimistic. Somewhere deep down, he believes there's still a chance that one day he might finally die. Lost in thought, Mutou suddenly hears a whistling sound. He turns, just in time to see an arrow flying straight at his head. The arrow hits, exploding on impact and evaporating his body. But in seconds, his two skills, Super Regeneration and Grit Indomitable Spirit, activate, bringing him back to life. The assailant, watching from a distance, releases another barrage of explosive arrows, all aimed at Mutou. From the shadows, the attacker mutters, "He's too dangerous to let live." As the camera zooms in, we see a girl in a school uniform holding a bow, her expression serious as she prepares her next shot. The girl who attacked Mutou accused him of being too dangerous, wondering aloud if he was a monster disguised as a human. The god observing the scene was completely dumbfounded. She hadn't expected things to turn out this way. With a sigh, she admitted to herself that she had really messed up this time. The girl, Runa Kakyoin, was another reincarnator chosen by God. Hidden nearby, Runa jumped from her hiding spot to check if Mutou had been killed. To her shock, she saw a silhouette emerging from the smoke. It was Mutou, alive and unharmed. The only visible damage was to his tattered clothes. Mutou stepped out, clutching his head and complaining about the pain, though he noted it wasn't nearly as bad as when he was hit by a car. Runa, seeing him completely fine, raised her bow again. She activated her magic, materializing another explosive arrow. Mutou's eyes widened in disbelief as the arrow appeared out of thin air. Runa aimed her bow directly at him and demanded he stop pretending to be human, urging him to show his true form as a monster. Mutou, utterly confused, stood frozen before responding with a nervous smile, insisting he was human. Runa, unnerved by his eerie smile, snapped at him, asking, "What's with that face?" Ignoring his expression, she pressed on, asking how he had managed to survive being crushed. Convinced that no ordinary human could endure such an injury, she concluded that Mutou had to be a monster, or perhaps a creature from another world. Hearing this, Mutou recalled God mentioning something similar. Runa's eyes widened at his response. "Wait, that short brat who smokes, with the bad attitude and mean glare, that God?" she asked in disbelief. Mutou nodded in confirmation. Back in the divine realm, God was losing her patience. Frustrated with Runa, she threw her pack of cigarettes at the screen and stomped on them in anger, muttering complaints about always being stuck with the most troublesome reincarnations. Meanwhile, Runa was left speechless, struggling to process the revelation that Mutou, like her, was a reincarnated person. Their shock was cut short when, out of nowhere, Runa slipped, or perhaps something pulled her, into the bushes. Mutou, startled, approached where Runa had fallen, calling out to ask if she was okay. He reminded her to be careful around tree roots. But as he reached her, he froze in surprise. Runa was wrapped tightly in the coils of a massive python. Runa struggled desperately to escape, but the snake only tightened its grip. To make matters worse, the python grabbed her bow and snapped it in half before constricting her even further. Fighting back as hard as she could, Runa spotted Mutou and shouted at him to help her. The python tightened its grip around Runa, making it harder for her to breathe. Gasping for air, she pleaded with Mutou to help her, her voice weak yet desperate. But Mutou stood motionless, his body frozen in fear. His breaths quickened as panic set in, his mind racing. What can I possibly do against something so huge? Doubt crept in. Why should I even help her? She attacked me first. She probably wouldn't have hesitated if it meant taking me down. But as these thoughts lingered, a memory from his past surfaced, his mother scolding him with harsh words, blaming him for things beyond his control. He recalled feeling utterly alone during those moments, wishing anyone would step in to help. Her words replayed in his mind. "If I don't do this, you'll never learn. This is for your own good." Snapped back to the present by Runa's cries, Mutou took a shaky breath. Her voice pierced through his doubt, begging for his help. Summoning every ounce of courage, Mutou pushed past his fear. "I have to try, even if it feels impossible." He sprinted toward the python, determination fueling his every step. With all his strength, Mutou struck the python. To his astonishment, the impact was immense, enough to break the creature's hold on Runa and bring it down completely. Runa, now freed, collapsed onto the ground, coughing and catching her breath. She looked up at Mutou with wide eyes. What did you just do?" Mutou was equally stunned, his voice trembling. "I don't know, did I really do that? Is it actually dead?" He glanced at the python's lifeless form, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Looking at his hand, Mutou's thoughts swirled. Was that really me? Or was it something to do with this so-called useless skill of mine? Now free from the python, Runa shyly looked at Mutou, thanked him for saving her, and apologized for attacking him earlier. She admitted that she had mistaken him for another monster in the forest. Then, turning to him, she asked if he was also reincarnated like her. Yeah, she was curious about his abilities, the power to come back to life after being eaten by the giant ape, and his ability to take down the python with a single strike. Are those skills from the goddess? Did she give them to you? She asked. Mutou shook his head, partially in denial. He explained that his skill was simply a healing ability that let him recover over and over again. As for defeating the python, he admitted he wasn't sure how he managed to do it either. Runa was surprised but listened as Mutou detailed his abilities. She nodded in understanding and pointed out that with his skills it would be incredibly difficult for anyone to hurt him or defeat him. Curious, Mutou asked about Runa's abilities. "What about your skills?" "I saw you materialize arrows out of thin air," he said. Runa smiled and spread her arms. A coat suddenly appeared in her hands. Mutou's eyes widened in surprise. Runa explained that her skill was creation. She could make anything out of nothing, but with one limitation. She could only create things if she understood how they were made. She handed the coat to Mutou, pointing out that he couldn't keep walking around in his tattered clothes. Mutou, receiving a gift for the first time in his life, blushed and shyly thanked her. He then asked about the explosive arrows she had used against him. Hearing this, Runa blushed, flustered, and stammered, "Yeah! Sorry about that." She went on to explain her skill, saying that the arrows she created worked like regular arrows, except they had explosive power. However, they wouldn't work on real monsters. As their conversation continued, they realized they hadn't introduced themselves yet. Runa offered her name first, and Mutou introduced himself in return. With their hostility resolved, Runa suggested they leave the forest. "This place is crawling with monsters. We need to find somewhere safe, maybe a town," she said. But Mutou immediately rejected the idea. Startled by his response, Runa asked him why. Instead of answering, Mutou walked over to a nearby tree, grabbed a vine hanging from a branch, and began inspecting its durability. Runa stared in confusion, utterly flabbergasted by his actions. Looking at her while tying the vine around his waist, Mutou calmly explained, "I'm planning to stay in this forest." Then, without waiting for her reply, he bid her farewell. Runa, shocked by his decision, ran to him and hugged him tightly, stopping him in his tracks. "Don't be reckless," she pleaded, trying to persuade him to abandon his dangerous plan. Mutou, stopped by Runa, complained, "This is why I hate being around people." But Runa retorted, "Of course I'll stop you. You can't just do something like that right in front of me." Mutou sighed, frustrated, and replied, "It's my life. I can do whatever I want." Runa was momentarily speechless, but quickly changed the subject. "This forest is full of monsters. Nothing here makes sense. And above all, we've been given a second chance to live. We should make it count," she said firmly. She continued, "Both of us died before, right? Doesn't that mean we should try to live this time?" As she spoke, a sudden memory flashed through her mind. A man stabbing her. Runa paled, feeling sick to her stomach, but she pushed through. She tried again to persuade Mutou. "I don't know what happened to you," she said, "but if you're so set on dying, why not fight the monsters in this forest instead? At least go out that way." She added, "Even hanging yourself wouldn't work because your skill would just heal you again." Then, her tone softened as she begged, "Mutou, I have a favor to ask. I know it might seem selfish and maybe it feels like I'm just using you, but I want to live in this world. I don't want to die again. Please protect me." Mutou paused, her words sinking in. He began to question why he had been given these abilities. The goddess had told him his skills wouldn't be useful, so why did he have them? After a moment he replied, "You're right. As long as I have this skill, even hanging myself wouldn't work." He added, "But I don't know how I defeated that monster earlier, and I'm not sure if I can protect you. But I'll try." Hearing his answer, Runa's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she said, smiling. "I'm counting on you from now on." With their roles decided, Mutou and Runa realized they needed to find a safe place to camp. Runa grumbled, "Camping in a place like this is dangerous." But Mutou, recalling his past, said, "I used to camp out all the time, mostly in parks and by riversides. This forest is big and full of wildlife. It's doable." Runa shook her head, rejecting his idea. "I was a Girl Scout back then," she said confidently. "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." She began listing their priorities. First, we need water. Second, food. And last, a safe place to stay and a way to start a fire. With their plan in place, they started walking. Along the way, Mutou spotted a mushroom and bent down, tempted to eat it. Runa quickly stopped him. "Don't touch that, it might be poisonous," she warned. After a few hours, they found a small cave. It wasn't much, but it would keep them dry if it rained. Next, they needed a fire. Mutou suggested rubbing sticks together, but Runa rolled her eyes. "Don't be silly, I can just use my skill." She focused and used her creation ability to make a lighter. Feeling proud, she tried to ignite it, but all she heard was a series of clicks. Click, click, click. The lighter was out of gas. Frustrated, Runa threw it aside. Embarrassed, she admitted, "I know how to make a lighter, but I don't know how to make gas for it." She sighed and muttered, "This skill is useless. I can only make items if I understand their properties." Still grumbling, she added, "I'd love to have a word with that goddess right about now." Mutou, meanwhile, noticed something strange. The cave they had been resting near began to shift. The ground trembled beneath them as the cave started moving. It wasn't a cave at all. It was a monster. The massive creature turned toward them, revealing itself to be a giant rhino-like beast. Its menacing gaze locked onto them, and it prepared to charge. Mutou and Runa were now facing their third monster, a massive rhino towering over them, glaring menacingly. Both were surprised by its appearance. Suddenly, the ground began to rise, forming something unexpected. Runa immediately shouted for Mutou to run, but he was a second too late and was pierced by a rock spike. Runa managed to avoid it, but when she saw Mutou get impaled, she froze in shock. Fortunately, Mutou's skills activated and brought him back to life. Taking advantage of this, Mutou ran and carried Runa with him. The rhino, seeing this, launched another barrage of rock spikes. Fortunately, Mutou was able to dodge them as he gained some distance. He set Runa down and prepared to fight the rhino, determined to protect her as he had promised. With a grin, he turned to face the creature and charged. Runa shouted for him to hold up. The rhino, seeing Mutou charge, released another spike, impaling him once more. But with sheer force, Mutou broke through the spike and continued charging. The rhino fired another barrage of spikes. Watching Mutou held and rise again multiple times, Runa couldn't take it anymore. Even with Mutou's healing skills, it was too much for her to handle. Despite the continuous barrage of spikes, Mutou was able to get up each time thanks to his skills, but he couldn't get close to the rhino. In this moment of desperation, he began to think about Runa. He knew she might forgive him, but it wasn't likely. If he died here, he would break his promise to her, and nothing would matter anymore. In the midst of his thoughts, an arrow flew past his head, aimed at the rhino. The creature quickly raised a spike pillar, shattering the arrow. Mutou looked back to see Runa materialize her bow and fire multiple explosive arrows at the rhino. The rhino blocked most of them, but the distraction was enough for Mutou to close the distance. Thanks to Runa, Mutou was able to attack from behind, saving him valuable time. With a clear shot at the rhino, Mutou prepared to strike and defeat it. But to his surprise, his punch bounced off, causing his arm to hurt. The rhino's skin was as tough as stone. Still, Mutou didn't give up. He punched the rhino again, and again, and again. The rhino roared in pain, but even as it was being attacked, it kept fighting. Runa watched in disbelief, amazed at how Mutou was determined to keep his promise to protect her, no matter what. On his final punch, Mutou finally defeated the rhino and it collapsed to the ground. With the rhino gone, both of them let out a sigh of relief. However, Mutou soon noticed something about his abilities. At first, punching the rhino had hurt him due to its tough hide, but now he realized that his body was becoming tougher and could take more damage. But their victory was short-lived. Suddenly, an attack struck Mutou. And that's the end of my recap. This is a brand new series called The 3 Skills I Received When Combined were the most powerful. To summarise, it's about the challenges and growth of the main character, and I'm excited to see what happens next for Mutou and Runa.